Snow feathered softly across the wide glass panes of the airport, muting the outside world into a hush of white. The morning light came in cold and silver, catching in the steam that curled from coffee cups and the faint scuff of boots on polished floors. Somewhere a child laughed, the sound too bright for winter. Somewhere else, a dog's leash jingled faintly like a bell. Elias Rowan walked with the measured pace of a man who had learned to listen to silence more than sound. His uniform bore the faded scent of winter rain, and the steadiness of years served without glory. Beside him padded Cain, his canine partner, a golden shepherd whose eyes gleamed with quiet intelligence and a loyalty that had outlived every friend Elias ever had. The dog's breath rose in slow plumes, his paws pressing ghost prints onto the glistening floor. They moved together through Gate 14, a ritual patrol beneath the hum of departures. Elias liked this hour, the lull between rushes, when the world seemed made of small sounds. The flick of ticket stubs, the sigh of a suitcase wheel, the mechanical heartbeat of the terminal. He often thought that airports were sanctuaries for both hope and regret. People leaving, people arriving, each carrying the weight of something unspoken. Cain stopped. His body stiffened, ears pricking forward. Elias slowed, glancing down. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't answer, but a low vibration rumbled in his chest. An unease Elias hadn't felt in years. Cain's eyes were fixed ahead, toward a row of waiting passengers near the security line. Elias followed the gaze. A woman stood there motionless in the crowd, a baby bundled against her chest. She wore an oversized coat that had seen too many winters, and her hair, the color of dark oak, fell in uneven strands over her pale face. There was something about the way she clutched the infant, too tightly, as though holding back the entire world. Cain barked once, then again, then a rapid, urgent burst that shattered the terminal's quiet. Heads turned. Murmurs rose like static through the air. The woman flinched, eyes darting in fear. "Hey, easy!" Elias tugged the leash, but Cain strained forward, muscles taut, hackles lifted. Not in aggression, but in desperate insistence. His bark echoed, sharp and commanding, as though trying to speak a truth no one else could hear. The woman stepped back, trembling. The baby in her arms made no sound. Elias could feel the judgment growing around them. The ripple of whispers, the tilt of suspicious eyes. What's wrong with her? Why's the dog going crazy? Something's not right. Security officers began to approach, hands resting on their belts. Elias knelt beside Cain, hand firm on his collar. "Settle, boy," he murmured. But Cain's gaze stayed fixed on the woman. The sound he made was different now, not a bark, but a whine, low and broken. When Elias looked up again, his eyes met hers. They were gray-blue, like river ice about to crack. There was fear in them, yes, but also something deeper, pleading, fragile, unsurrendered. She whispered something he couldn't hear, tightening her hold on the baby as though the act itself was a shield. Elias's superior arrived, a younger man named Harper, polished boots, permanent smirk. "What's going on here, Rowan? Control your mutt!" Elias opened his mouth to explain, but Harper was already waving to the guards. "Ma'am, step aside, please. We'll need to check your bag." The woman hesitated, then obeyed, her movements stiff, protective. The crowd parted like a tide retreating from storm. Cain barked again, the sound raw with urgency. "Quiet!" Harper snapped. The reprimand hit Elias like a lash. He tightened his grip, but Cain's body quivered under his hand. Elias felt torn, between duty and an instinct older than training. Something in Cain's reaction wasn't routine. The dog wasn't responding to fear or threat. It was something else. Something Elias could feel in his own chest, though he couldn't name it. In a small inspection room, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the woman sat with the child in her lap. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold coffee. Elias stood outside the glass wall, watching. Cain sat beside him, whining softly. Harper and another officer questioned her. Name? Reason for travel? ID? Her answers were halting. Her hands shook when she reached for her bag. The baby slept. Too still, too quiet. Elias watched her mouth move, watched the tremor in her jaw when she said, "Maeve Thorne." Her voice barely carried through the glass, but the way she spoke her own name, it was as though she was reminding herself it still belonged to her. When Harper lifted the edge of the blanket to check on the child, Maeve's eyes flared in panic. "Please don't wake him," she whispered. Harper frowned, but Elias could see his irritation more than his curiosity. He wasn't listening. None of them were. Through the reflection, Elias saw his own face, older, lined, and suddenly uncertain. He remembered another winter 4 years ago, another small body, and the night he hadn't listened to Kane then either. That failure still haunted his dreams. The snowstorm, the missing girl, the silence that had followed. He'd sworn never to ignore the dog again, but guilt had a way of dulling even the keenest instincts. Kane pawed the floor, nose pressed against the glass, eyes fixed on the baby. Elias knelt beside him, whispering, "You think she's hiding something?" The dog whined in reply, soft but insistent. Inside, Maeve lifted her sleeve to brush her cheek, and Elias caught a glimpse of bruises along her wrist, faded yellow and purple. His stomach turned. When Harper exited, Elias caught his arm. "She's scared, not dangerous," he said quietly. "Let me talk to her," Harper scoffed. "She's hiding something, Rowan. Your mutt proved that much." But Elias didn't move away. He met Harper's gaze with something cold. "Sometimes it's not the woman the dog's barking at." Harper stared at him, then shrugged. "Fine, 10 minutes. Then she goes to holding until we sort this mess out." The door closed behind Elias with a tired sigh of hinges. Inside, Maeve looked smaller than she had moments ago, as if the sterile light had drained the last of her color. The baby lay quiet, breathing shallowly beneath the wool. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elias said gently. Her eyes flicked up, uncertain. "That's what they all say." He sat across from her, hands resting on his knees, keeping his voice low. "Kane, my dog, he's trained to detect danger. He doesn't bark for no reason." She swallowed hard, gaze fixed on the floor. "He's wrong this time." Elias tilted his head. "Maybe he's not." The silence between them stretched thin. Then, unexpectedly, she whispered, "Please, don't take him from me." He saw the tears before she tried to hide them, saw how they caught in the cracks of her skin like melting snow. Elias wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but something in her face stopped him. There was a dignity in her fear, a strength in the way she trembled. He realized then that this wasn't about guilt. It was about survival. From outside, a sharp knock sounded. Harper's voice through the intercom. "Time's up." Maeve wiped her cheeks. The baby stirred faintly but didn't cry. Elias stood, torn between the rules that held his badge and the mercy that made him human. He wanted to tell her he believed her. He wanted to tell her that Kane had never barked at innocence, only at pain. But all he said was, "You'll be all right." Her smile was barely there, fragile as frost. No one ever is. Later, when the terminal quieted again, Elias was told she'd been escorted to a temporary holding room near the main exit. He signed the report mechanically, the words blurring on the paper. Outside, snow thickened against the glass, swallowing the lights into soft halos. He walked past Nora, the old janitor, mopping near the vending machines. She looked up at him with kind eyes that had seen too much. "You look like a man hearing ghosts," she said. "Maybe I am," Elias murmured. She nodded once. "Sometimes animals bark at things we bury." "Don't hush him too quick." Elias stopped walking. The echo of her words clung to him. Hours later, long after the announcements had faded and the last flight had departed, he found himself drawn back to the inspection room. The lights were dim, chairs stacked, silence heavy. Kane trotted beside him, tail low. He expected to find Maeve still there, but the room was empty. The door to the back corridor hung slightly open, snow blowing faintly inside. On the floor beneath the chair lay a torn strip of paper. Hospital bracelet plastic, white and worn. He crouched to pick it up. The name faintly printed. Maeve Thorne. His breath caught. Kane whimpered, the sound deep and mournful. Elias closed his eyes. The weight of snow pressing against the windows, the hum of the empty terminal around them. Somewhere in the distance, a security alarm chimed faintly, swallowed by the storm outside. He looked down at the bracelet, then at Kane. "You were right again, weren't you?" The dog pressed his head against Elias's knee, tail sweeping softly against the floor. For a long moment, neither moved. The world outside blurred into white. Elias slipped the bracelet into his pocket. The snow whispered against the glass like something alive, like breath. The night closed in with quiet inevitability, but somewhere beneath its cold, a question began to take root, the kind that doesn't let a man sleep until he finds its answer. And as the lights dimmed across the terminal, the only sound left was Kane's low whine echoing through the empty gate, steady as a heartbeat, ancient as memory. Morning came slowly, dragging pale light across the snow-blanketed fields beyond the airport. The storm from the night before had quieted into a gray hush, as though the world itself was listening. Elias hadn't slept. The torn hospital bracelet lay on his table, curled like a question mark that refused to rest. Kane paced the apartment, restless, his nails ticking against the wood floor in uneasy rhythm. Every so often, he would stop by the door and look back at Elias with that same haunted urgency from the terminal. Elias poured himself coffee gone cold, the taste bitter, grounding. The city advisory scrolled across the small television. Missing person alert, Maeve Thorne, last seen near the regional airport, traveling with an infant male. The sight of her name turned his stomach. He told himself to leave it to the authorities, to let the world correct itself. But guilt had its own gravity. He clipped Kane's leash with a quiet finality. "We're going," he said. Kane wagged his tail once, low and determined. Outside, the morning air bit like teeth. Snow squeaked beneath their boots and paws as they crossed into the outer roads. The world was muffled. Streetlights haloed by fog. Every sound softened except the rhythm of their steps. Kane led with nose low, tracking invisible threads through the cold. Elias didn't need to command. The dog knew. They followed a winding trail away from the main highway, through the industrial outskirts, and into a small road lined with bare trees. Faint footprints wove between them, nearly erased by fresh powder. Kane pressed forward, his breath pluming in steady bursts. Elias's thoughts wandered as they walked. He thought of Maeve's eyes, how they had held both terror and tenderness, a woman cornered by something unseen. He thought of his own failures, how once he'd ignored Kane's bark during a winter much like this one, and how that silence had cost a child's life. Redemption wasn't a loud thing, he'd learned. It was quiet and cold, like breath-fogging glass before it disappears. An hour passed before Kane stopped. They stood before an old service road half swallowed by snowdrifts. A faint column of smoke rose in the distance. Kane gave a low whine, glancing back at Elias. The cabin appeared through the trees, a structure slouched in age, its roof heavy with frost. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney, more sigh than signal. Elias's pulse tightened. He unlatched Kane's leash but kept a firm hold. "Easy," he whispered. They approached the door. Light flickered faintly from inside, a weak fire's glow dancing against the frosted window. Elias knocked once, knuckles echoing. Silence. Then the softest sound, a hush of movement, a baby's faint cry quickly stifled. He tried again. "Maeve," he said through the wood, voice calm but firm. "It's Elias Rowan, the officer from the airport." The door opened a crack, just wide enough for her face to appear. Her eyes looked bruised from sleeplessness. Snowflakes clung to her hair like scattered stars. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Kane sat, tail flicking in quiet patience. Elias kept his voice gentle. "They're looking for you. I just want to make sure you're safe." Her gaze dropped to the dog, then back to him. "He barked because he remembered," she murmured, stepping back to let them in. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and wet wood. The fire in the hearth was dying, orange light pooling on the rough floorboards. The baby lay wrapped beside the fire, cheeks flushed with warmth, asleep. Maeve sank into a chair, exhaustion pulling at her posture until she seemed carved from shadow. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said softly. "I just needed to get away before he found us." "Who?" Elias asked, though he already knew. Her fingers twisted the frayed edge of her coat. "My husband. He works at the airport. Security. I thought if I moved fast enough, he wouldn't notice me leave. But he saw me that morning. I think the dog smelled him." Elias crouched by the fire, feeding a few logs into the embers. Sparks lifted like brief stars. "He barked at the scent," he said quietly. "You weren't the danger, he was." She nodded, tears glinting before she could hide them. "I didn't know where else to go. I just needed one night, a place where the cold could hide me." Elias studied her face, the small tremor in her hands, the faint red marks at her wrists. Everything about her spoke of years spent surviving quietly, enduring what others never saw. "You could have told us," he said. "They never believe women who run," she replied, almost smiling. "They believe the men who say they overreact." Her voice was fragile but steady, and for a moment, Elias couldn't find words. Kane moved closer to the baby, sniffing gently, then laid down near the small bundle as though standing guard. Maeve watched with watery eyes. "He knows who the good ones are," she whispered. Elias nodded. "He always has." A sudden rumble outside broke the fragile peace. Tires crunching over ice. Headlights swept across the windows, cutting through the gloom. Maeve's breath hitched. She stood, holding the baby tight. "He found me," she breathed. Elias turned toward the door, instinct sharp as a blade. "Get back," he said softly. The truck door slammed shut outside. Footsteps crunched nearer, heavy, deliberate. A man's voice called through the cold. "Maeve! You can't keep running from me." Elias's hand went to his sidearm, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. Kane rose, silent and tense, eyes locked on the door. The handle rattled, then the door burst open. The man filled the frame, broad-shouldered, face wind-burned, eyes wild from sleepless rage. The sight of Maeve and Elias together made something dark twist in his expression. "You again," he snarled at Elias. "You think you can hide her from me?" "Put the weapon down," Elias said quietly. "You don't want to do this." But the man stepped forward, the glint of metal catching the firelight. Maeve gasped, shielding the baby. Kane growled, a deep primal sound that vibrated through the air. The next moment unfolded like slow motion. The man lunged, a shout breaking through the storm outside. Kane leapt, hitting him hard across the chest, the gun clattering to the floor. A struggle followed. Snow from the open door whipping inside, firelight flashing across sweat and motion. Elias grabbed the man's wrist, twisting until the bone gave a muted crack. He wrestled him to the ground as Kane held firm at the arm. The man cried out, cursing, kicking, but Elias pressed him down until the fight drained away. Breathing hard, he called it in over the radio clipped to his vest. His voice steady though his hands trembled. "Suspect in custody. Cabin at mile marker 23. Send backup." Maeve stood frozen, clutching her child. Eyes wide with disbelief and relief tangled together. When it was over, when the sirens had faded, the man taken away, and the cabin filled again only with the whisper of fire, Elias sat by the hearth, Kane resting his head on his knee. Maeve sat across from him, the baby asleep once more, the storm easing outside into a quiet snowfall. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "He barked for me," she said. "Not against me." Elias met her gaze, something breaking open quietly inside his chest. "He barked for the truth," he said. "I just didn't know how to listen." The silence that followed was warm, not heavy. It wrapped around them like the hush that follows confession, the kind that comes before healing begins. Maeve reached down, letting her fingers brush Kane's fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for hearing him." Elias almost smiled. "He's the one who always finds what we've lost." Snow began to fall again outside, gentle, endless, the kind that erases footsteps. In that small cabin, something shifted. Two broken souls and one loyal creature sat in the dim light. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the cold inside him begin to thaw. Days later, when the official reports were filed and the story written neatly into police records, it read like a routine rescue, but the truth lived elsewhere. In the quiet glances exchanged at the hospital when Maeve thanked him again, in the way Kane leaned against her leg as if blessing her path. On his last patrol through the airport weeks later, Elias paused near Gate 14. Snow drifted beyond the glass just as it had that first morning. Travelers hurried past, unaware of the story that had nearly unfolded among them. Nora the janitor was there again, humming faintly, her mop tracing circles across the floor. "You found her," she said simply. Elias nodded. "Or maybe she found us." Nora smiled, the kind that carried no surprise. "Dogs remember what people forget," she said. "They know how to love without asking why." He watched Kane sitting quietly by the window, eyes following the falling snow. For a moment, the terminal didn't feel so empty. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that long winter lift just enough to breathe again. He looked out at the whitened sky and whispered, more to himself than to anyone else, "Maybe we all need someone who barks for us when we're too afraid to speak." As he walked on, Kane's steady footsteps matched his own, two shadows moving in rhythm through the pale light. Somewhere in the distance a child laughed, a bright, fleeting sound that warmed the air. The world went on. Planes lifted into the gray, snow kept falling, and beneath it all, the quiet truth lingered. Love often arrives not in words, but in the faithful sound of a bark that refuses to be silenced. If this story touched something inside you, if you, too, have ever been saved by a quiet act of loyalty, then stay a while in these whispered tales. There are more stories waiting, soft as snow, strong as faith. Subscribe and listen closely. Sometimes the smallest sounds carry the greatest truths.